Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. This is my series on on memes and posts on my Instagram account that allegedly violate policy of my employer. We're going to get right down to it because the meme that I have for you today, this is a twofer, and it's a good one, I promise. So the reason this is a twofer is because they had a problem with the actual post that I made right here. Where I said, no more catching domestic violence suspects at night, guys. The best way to fight crime is to let the criminals sleep. And this is a screenshot of a news article that says Columbus police policy change puts restrictions on serving warrants overnight. Then they also had a problem with my comment that I put on the side that says, one lesson you learn as a police officer is you can't get in trouble for doing nothing. Sit in a parking lot, avoid the public, let the criminals run loose. You won't lose your job for that. You won't get fired for that. You won't go to prison for that. This is what happens when you prioritize optics over fighting crime. I also have a clip of the Civilian Review Board reading this very meme. I suppose for consistency, let's play that clip now.
This post depicts a news article picturing a CPD cruiser with the headline, Columbus Police Policy Change Puts Restrictions on Serving Warrants Overnight. The officer added, no more catching domestic violence suspect at night, guys. The best way to fight crime is to let the criminals sleep. A comment made by the officer on the post further states, one lesson you learn as a police officer, you can't get in trouble for doing nothing. Sit in the parking lot, avoid the public, let criminals run loose. You won't lose your job for that. You won't get fired for that. You won't go to prison for that. This is what happens when you prioritize optics over fighting crime, which is the reason we have police officers. The officer stated that he did post the photo and that his intent behind posting this photo was to comment on the news article. He stated that it was unfortunate because it was the best time to catch these people. The comment made in the post regarding police action were found to be in violation of, again, policy 10.18.3a, noting that the SOP 1.01, which states, to fulfill this mission, sworn personnel assigned to patrol zones shall utilize preventative and directive patrol techniques in response to calls for service, etc.
Alrighty guys, so the reason that this one is a twofer, and I'm going to go kind of fast because I don't want this to be incredibly long. It's actually a very simple type of subject, but it's a twofer because they wanted me to explain both sides of this, the post and the comment. So the post itself, this is a news article that, and this was, let me take you back a step. In response to the Donovan Lewis shooting, I'm pretty sure that was his name. That was the man who had warrants for illegal weapons possession and for the offense of domestic violence. And officers went up, knocked on his door. His friends came out the door. A canine went into the house. Canine was barking at his door. Officers were giving him commands. He refused to come out of his room. When the officers opened up his door, he rolled towards the officers. One of the officers thought he might have a firearm. They shot him. He died. It turns out he didn't have a firearm. It's a very unfortunate turn of events. I think we can all accept that that's not the way the officers intended for this to happen. It's unfortunate that it went down that way. In response to that, the administration, and I don't know if it was the chief of police or if it was the mayor that instructed the chief of police to put out this policy, but a new policy was handed down that says misdemeanor, what did it say? Non-violent, no, it just said misdemeanor warrants, including domestic violence, will no longer be served in the evening hours. And I don't know the specific hours. I don't know if it's 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Basically, when people are supposed to be sleeping, officers are not allowed to be out there serving warrants, including warrants for domestic violence, unless they get explicit permission from a lieutenant to go serve that warrant. So What that means is that a lieutenant now is the one who has to bear responsibility for if anything goes wrong with serving that warrant. So if an officer says, hey, LT, this guy named John Smith, he lives at 45 South 1st Street. He has a warrant for domestic violence. His truck is parked out front. I think that we should go serve him because that is a violent crime. He might be inside with his wife or the person that he abused, or his wife or the person he abused is actually staying at another location because they don't feel safe with him out running the streets. We would like this woman to return to her home and feel safe and have all of her possessions and her belongings, everything. We want to go serve this domestic violence warrant. And the lieutenant, knowing that if the slightest thing goes wrong with our service of this warrant, i.e. something happens where we end up shooting this man, that it's all going to fall back on him because everyone's going to say, hey, Lieutenant Smith is the one that gave permission for this warrant to be served. That lieutenant is going to say, no, you guys don't need to serve that warrant right now. Back and hold for first shift or for SWAT or whoever is going to go around and start serving warrants. The effect of this is that now, in my opinion, people with domestic violence warrants or people who are wanted for domestic violence, they used to hide from us, but now they can literally just go home, go to their bed, get a good night's sleep, and then get up in the morning and leave their house, and they will be much more difficult to catch. I worked third shift for about a decade. We used to regularly, when it was slow, if it was a slow night, we'd go back to the sub, we'd print off a list of people with warrants. We'd start going, well, the people aren't always at their house, so we'd go into mugshots, we'd go into court view, we'd go into the report system, all these places where we think they might be, and we would take the most serious warrants and we'd start serving those. And then we'd get to the ones that are less serious down the road. Usually, we didn't run out of serious warrants, so we would be serving warrants all night long or until we were all tied up with people that we had under arrest. It was very common just to call up a couple guys, maybe 3 or 4 of us. We'd go start beating on doors and windows, ordering people out of the house. Someone would come to the door. We'll say, hey, is Joe Blow here? They'll say, no, he's not. We'll say, well, he has a warrant for his arrest and this is his listed address. We would like to check the house. They let us into the house. We search the house. We either find the person, we don't find the person, we leave. I have done this literally hundreds of times, and not a single time that I have done this has this turned into a shooting. But since there was one incident that went bad, they changed the whole policy. So now these domestic violence perpetrators, these people with warrants for domestic violence, they can sleep peacefully in their beds at night. I don't think that is the right message. I have a problem with it. Coincidentally, in the city of Columbus, homicides stemming from domestic violence situations are up, I think 70 or 80%. And they make up 20% of the homicides this year in the city of Columbus. There's been some news articles. I'll put them up on the screen now, somewhere behind me, that say, what is it? There's already been more domestic violence homicides in the year 2023 than there were in the entire last year. They're blowing the numbers out of the water as per average. This is also something that the mayor likes to use as a distraction when he's talking about our homicide numbers. He'll say, yes, well, homicides are up this year, but we've had a significant increase in domestic violence related homicides, and the police can't do anything about that. I actually have a clip of him saying that. I have a couple clips. I'll play them now.
Well, homicides were down last year to date. They're up by about 10. So what specifically are you going to do this year to make sure you don't hit another record?
And as I mentioned yesterday, 70% of that increase is domestic violence. So nothing really that the police can do anything about if children are abused or killed by their parents.
There have been 12 homicides this year, at the beginning of May, from domestic violence situations. Well more than all of last year. 20% of the homicides in the city of Columbus this year.
So, like I said, there might be a correlation between the increased number of homicides that are domestic violence related and this policy that prevents officers from serving those domestic violence warrants at night. That's all I'm saying, is maybe you're not putting out the right message. Maybe you're putting out a message that domestic violence isn't important, because if it was important, officers would be kicking down doors in the middle of the night trying to catch these suspects. We want people to believe that if you go out there and you commit a violent crime, that the police will be searching for you. When you make these policies and you put something out that says, well, yes, this crime is bad, but we're not going to be out there searching for you, it makes people believe that there are no repercussions for their crime. Therefore, they will go out and commit more crime. That is the reason I posted this thing. One of the other funny things about this particular meme was that one of the investigators is a retired officer from the same department that I work for. When I talked about this, I said, yeah, officers are no longer serving domestic violence warrants at night. He goes, wait a minute, are you serious? Is this real? He's like, yeah, you're goddamn right, it's real. And here's a news article about it. They hauled me in and made me explain that. And then they also said that because I made those statements, that's a violation of policy. Good luck proving that to a judge, that I'm not allowed to say those kind of things. Segueing on to the second part of my post, and that's where I said, one lesson you learn as a police officer is you can't get in trouble for doing nothing. I'm replying to the original part, don't serve domestic violence warrants at night, because what these officers are now forced to do in the middle of the night when there's nobody calling 911 and there's nobody out driving around, they're just supposed to go sit and do nothing. There's really nothing else for them to do. So that's why I make this next statement is, you don't get in trouble for doing nothing. That is what the city is telling you. Go sit in a parking lot, avoid the public, let criminals run loose. You won't lose your job for that. You won't get fired for that. You won't go to prison for that. This is what happens when you prioritize optics over fighting crime, which is the reason we have police officers. They said that comment was also a violation of policy because police officers are required to go out and move around and proactively search for criminal activity and fight crime. They're so stupid. Like, what I did there was I said, listen, you made a policy that's forcing officers to sit around and do nothing. And I offered criticism of that policy. Then they turned around and said, well, you're telling officers to sit and do nothing. You're violating policy. First of all, I cannot violate the policy of not being a proactive officer while I'm on social media at home off duty. Making a comment about lazy officers does not mean that I'm sitting in a parking lot not doing my job. You can't punish me for not doing my job when I'm not at work. Do you understand the amount of overreach that this freaking thing has? You're trying to punish me. You're really trying to punish me for saying you guys just made a rule forcing officers to sit and do nothing. You're trying to punish me saying that I am encouraging people to sit and do nothing. It was not me that is encouraging officers to sit and do nothing. I'm criticizing that concept, you fucking morons. You're too stupid to understand that. It's insane. Now let's get into also the validity of the comment itself. I've been a police officer for 12 years now. I work first shift. I've seen my share of lazy officers in my day. I actually just heard a story the other day, and I'll tell you about that now, that it was on another zone, not the zone that I work on. It was a supervisor who had a 10-3 called on him. This means he showed up on a situation that was very violent and dangerous, and it was a high-risk situation. He needed help, and he needed help right now. That is an officer in trouble call. A 10-3 is officer in trouble. If you're not doing anything, you have the responsibility to respond immediately without delay. This occurred. Multiple officers were driving lights and sirens towards this sergeant who had an officer in trouble call put out on him. And while they were doing so, they saw other officers driving the opposite direction. They looked on the computer to see what those officers were doing, and they were not assigned to a call at that time. The officers who drove lights and sirens got there first. They helped handle the situation. Then the officers that were driving the other way eventually showed up. The officers that responded lights and sirens informed the supervisor of what happened. He looked up their body camera, their GPS, all of their things, and wanted to issue discipline to those officers for not properly responding to his officer in trouble call. He was told that he can't do that. There are police officers on my department. There's police officers around the country. There's police officers all over the place that are fat, lazy slugs that don't do their job. It's virtually impossible to fire them. It's virtually impossible to discipline them. It's virtually impossible to make them do their job. What I'm doing is I am commenting on how difficult that is and what message that sends. There's a lot of officers who pick up on that message. They say, you know what? My buddy the other day, he was sent on a gun run, a person with a gun call. He arrived on that call, saw the suspect that was described on the call, approached the suspect. Suspect fled. Officer tackled that suspect while trying to put him in handcuffs, punched the suspect in the face multiple times. This was captured on cell phone video. The officer took the guy into custody, put cuffs on him. There was no firearm discovered. Now, the mayor, the political establishment, the media, there's riots. All of these people are out there calling this officer a racist. The reason this officer is in this situation is because he aggressively pursued criminal activity. He responded to a 911 call in the way he was trained to respond. His reward for that is that he now becomes public enemy number one. The officer that responds slowly, that takes a couple laps around an alternate block before responding to that call, responds on that call, goes and talks to the caller, and the caller says, hey, the guy that had a gun that was threatening me, he's no longer here. I don't know where he went. That officer will not get in trouble. That's the problem. And that is what I was demonstrating with my comment. The city that I work for wants to punish me for making that comment. The Civilian Review Board finds it highly offensive. And that it was clear that when the officer was confronted on this, he didn't want to take responsibility for his comments. This is stupid beyond... I can't imagine the stupidity behind this. I feel bad for the investigator who brought me up on this and tried to say that this is a violation of policy. I know that your day-to-day life must be incredibly hard because of your low level of intelligence. I really feel bad for you. I did nothing wrong. This is a joke. This whole process is a joke. This is an infringement on my First Amendment rights. And that's all I got to say today. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.